Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamari, Managing Director of Elkat Global.
We have a new, exciting episode today, and we have a very interesting guest with us, Essa Al-Saleh. He's chairman of the board at Volta Trucks, recently joined Volta, but also many of you know Essa, I guess, from his previous life. Let's call it like that. So he was the president and CEO of Agility Global Integrated Logistics. For many, many years, he basically took Agility from a 300-person operation to a top 10 global logistics business with over 4 billion in revenues, operating in 100 countries and 18,000 people. So quite a story there. And very excited to have you, Essa. We look forward to your sharing today. And without further ado, thanks for joining us and a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Radu. It's a pleasure to connect with you and always enjoyed your platform. And I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you on this platform.
Our pleasure. And maybe let's start a little bit. And I've been looking into your background, and you were, from an engineering background. That's where you started, isn't it? And then you kind of, had a fantastic career, and you ended up being the CEO and leading a global expansion for a company. So maybe just let's start there. Let's tell us a little bit about, engineering to being an entrepreneurial business CEO. It's quite different. So maybe walk us through a little bit.
Yeah, how much time do we have? I graduated as an electrical engineer, worked as an engineer for a few years, and then went and thought that was good for a period of time, but it wasn't for me. I went back and got my education in an MBA in finance, and immediately after that, I had the unique opportunity to join a company called PwC, Public Warehousing Company, in '98. That was on a mission to create a logistics platform in the Middle East. And my first question on the interview was, what logistics is all about? And I said, what is logistics? I had basically no clue. But I think that's part of one of the things that in my journey, I guess, till today is not be afraid to get out of my comfort zone. So I jumped in with the company, and we started this journey out of Kuwait and expanded the business throughout the Middle East platform. I mean, from '98 till 2003. Demand for our services grew exponentially. At that time, we faced explosive growth between 2003 till 2007, combination of organic and a whole bunch of acquisitions we did at the same time. I think we completed about 40 plus acquisitions and deployed close to $2 billion of capital to build a global network, starting from the Middle East and going out. Then since 2007, that's when I assumed the CEO position of the Global Integrated Logistics. And my role was then to put it all together, right? 40 plus companies, integrate them onto a global platform, system, process, management and organization. And we were able to do that until crisis hit in 2009, as the world economic crisis, I guess, hit, plus some other challenges of growth that we had to face. And then you have to adjust, right? Adjust to, as they used to say, the new reality. And that was when we were able to do over a period of time. And thankfully, through focus and the right teams and the right actions, we were able to, stabilize the business and continue to grow up until end of last year, when I decided to step down and pursue other opportunities. I wouldn't have changed a thing over the past 22 years in my journey. It's been a journey of a lifetime that I think, wouldn't change a thing. But amongst the things that I learned the best through that process, right, was how to scale a business globally, how to bring on and develop people that we needed to support the business growth and be aligned to our values and our strategy and all that. And I felt that that's something I would love to do with another platform. And that's why I shifted gears into more of a kind of helping startups in a private equity, private investment role. And that's what led me to Volta, amongst other opportunities that I work with. And another very exciting mission, purpose-driven company with Volta Trucks that I'm quite excited about.
Yeah. And we're getting a lot of people saying hi. I'll pull just some. So, people from your Agility time, I think, that are saying hello. So yes. All is online. So quite a few people. That's I want to just double click and stay a little bit with the topic of, well, there's two topics on my mind. So first, and there's this whole discussion, and it's not only in logistics, it's also in supply chain. We deal a lot with executives, and there's a bit of a challenge in transitioning from a head of supply chain, chief operations to be CEO. The same in my mind is a little bit from an engineering, very practical, get stuff done kind of type of mindset, right? Which you did to a CEO. So I want to just go on that topic a little bit. And if you were to reflect back, obviously it's been quite a while, but what were some of the, maybe some sharings or lessons, or how do you step, from one framework to the other that you might share with the audience that might be useful?
Well, that's a very good question. It's, there's a philosophical point and then there's a practical point. The philosophical point is you can't overthink it. You got to just do it and proceed in terms of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and try not to box yourself into any particular style or approach. So that's kind of a philosophical point. What does that mean on a practical basis is, as you take steps, you have to be what I call agile, iterate and learn. And not to be afraid to make mistakes. And believe me, over the past 22 years, I made a ton of mistakes. But I think I've been blessed with the right team that I put in place together, and the willingness to be curious and accept what I know and what I don't know. And that curiosity has always, helped me through my journey to evolve from, an engineer to a salesperson. My first job at Agility was in sales, business development, M&A strategy, to a CEO position. And through that process, you continuously seek to challenge yourself and grow and learn, and apply that learning to yourself and to the people around you. And what you learn, amongst other things, that at each stage of the journey, there's different skills you have to develop. From managing yourself to managing your small team, to managing a function, to ultimately managing a unit, to managing a company. And at each level, you have to learn different skills and practices. Ultimately, when you get to, when you're managing yourself, you control everything. You control the input and the output. It's up to you. As you grow to become a CEO, you have to learn to influence and trust and put some parameters around and be clear in your communication and expectations, as opposed to managing day-to-day the requirements of the work. So you have to be, although you have the title which evokes control, but in reality you have less control. So you have to find the new kinds of tools and styles and approaches to be able to influence and control indirectly. So that's kind of through that process, that's how I went through that journey. But also at the same time, I tend to read a lot of books. One of the things I do enjoy is reading, and there was a few books that helped influence some of the things that I do today.
You got me curious. Can you name some?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, many books. So there's a book, one of the first books, and this is called Leadership Pipeline by Stephen Drotter and Ram Charath. I like the book so much that one of the authors, I actually engaged him as a coach for a period of time in the early stages of my career, and he was very, very, very good and helpful. He did a 360 with me and my team, and you have to be open to doing 360s and getting the feedback that you like and you don't like. So that was one book. Amongst other books over time, especially these days in startups, there's a book we've read, and actually we read it at the time at Agility, had the whole management team read it. It was The Hard Things About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Fantastic book. Really tells you kind of the hard things about hard things, how to deal with situations where you have no clear answers. So it's a fantastic book. Another book I like is a strategy book. That helped influence a lot of our strategy development at Agility, called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummel. Fantastic book. Highly recommend that book, especially if you're thinking about developing a strategy for your business, which covers three things, right? Having a clear diagnosis of any situation, any business context, to developing a guiding principle to the business, and ultimately leading to a set of actions that you want to. So it's about strategy, not necessarily fully execution, but it's a good book about leadership and strategy development that I think is important. So I could go on. There's many more.
No, but very, very good examples. And I'll probe, because we're getting quite a few questions from the audience on the startups and how that will make the transition for you. But I want to stay with one other question. And I've heard countless people speak greatly about you as a great leader at Agility. That to me is a great sign. I'm just curious, from all the lessons, the learnings of the 22 years that you spent with the company, and you grew the company, from a leadership or team development or whatever you want to call that, right? From a people, let's call it people simply. What are some of the principles that you followed? What are some of the, I guess, grains of wisdom that you found most useful? And I'm not expecting rocket science here, but what was most useful for you as a leader?
No, I actually have a framework that I like to talk about. There's probably 3 or 4 pillars of things that I think define a good leader. One is what I like to call strategic orientation, the ability to kind of connect dots, filter a lot of information, and provide some insight into the context of a situation. So this kind of strategic orientation is one of the, I think, important skills a leader has to develop. Context, taking action without context could be dangerous. So you have to be able to understand the context and understand the actions that you need to take. Articulate that well to the group. So that's kind of one big piece of leadership I think is important. And I think that people are motivated by it because they want to know what is the direction, strategy, and they want to help contribute to that strategy. The second pillar, I think also of any leader is what I call the ability to be a strong performance manager. And what does that mean? So a performance manager is the ability to set goals and targets and drive accountability in the business. Make some tough calls when you have to. Sometimes you're faced with situations that you have to make some unpopular calls, or maybe take some risk in terms of investments that you want to make. So that's another kind of pillar of strong leader. And then the third pillar is kind of what values you bring and you exhibit as a leader. And I think in terms of values, in terms of obviously the obvious ones, integrity is very important, but I think curiosity is also very, very important. Values in terms of your teamwork, quality work that you like to demonstrate. There's a whole bunch of values and beyond the skills that you also need to bring to the table. So these are the softer side, the skills, the values, and all that are elements of the third pillar of a strong leader: strategic orientation, performance management, values, and skills that you bring to the table. And I think over time I've learned, you find people that are strong on strategy, but not necessarily strong on execution. Or you find people great on execution, but not great on strategy. And you have to recognize how to internalize that and assess that and give feedback to people around those framework to help them grow. And also be willing to understand yourself, what you're good at and what you're not good at, and then how to compensate with the people around you. So that's kind of a framework. And thankfully, my team that we've built over the time, we're all complementary in many aspects of running our business and developing our company from where it was $300 million to $4 billion business, and with all the ups and downs along the way.
No, absolutely. I'll take a question from Iyad, who's joining us, and this is in relation to all the acquisitions, but also the subtleties that you've experienced right over time. And he's asking about obviously cultural understanding, respect, understanding the context that you just said. And how are you currently in your private equity VC work that you're doing and the startups that you're mentoring and advising and being on the boards, using maybe that experience today?
It's a great question from Iyad. And, look, thankfully, we did 40 plus acquisitions at Agility. Not all of them were great. I think we got more right than wrong. That's the good news. But in all aspects, there are several things that you have to think about in any acquisition, and it's helping me apply in my current phase of my journey, my personal journey. The easiest to buy is the skill, kind of the technical side of things and the physical side. The hardest thing you need to look at is the culture. And in the context of Agility, we were buying and integrating the businesses. We weren't buying and keeping them separate. We were integrating them from a management structure, from a systems perspective, from all aspects. The hardest part that took most time was integration from a cultural alignment perspective, and that is the hardest. And that learning is applied in my current approach to the startups and investments that we're making today. And that's the fun part. That's the puzzle you're continuously trying to solve for. But what I'm doing is applying the same principles that you've learned, whether it's the leadership framework, what it takes to execute properly, define a good strategy, as we talked about, what do you look for in the people around you? These are all ingredients that we bring to bear in the companies that we're supporting, but also in coaching and advising them as especially the CEOs and as they manage the businesses going forward. And that's the funnest part of this, is helping people become much more successful than they already are. And I enjoy that. That's the fun part.
But I guess how to say, the $1 million thing when it comes to culture, because culture, you don't touch it, right? It's not a tangible, it's intangible. It's
Very.
It's a soft nature. How do you, I don't know if quantify is the right word, but how do you figure out the culture of a company? Because also when you look at acquiring, obviously that company may want to be acquired. Obviously there's some people that are going to need money. They might want to position in a certain way. So I guess, what's that reality check? How do you make sure that you have a correct assessment of what's going on the inside? Because that can be quite tricky to do, right? So maybe you can share some do's and don'ts, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Maybe I will say, I'll just try to clarify a point you made, which I agree, but maybe have a different perspective on it. Culture is it's hard to touch and feel, but when you go into a setup or a company, you feel it, you know it. And today, if I give you a list of 3 or 4 or 5 top companies, I bet you can define their culture immediately, 1, 2, or 3. Whether it is the Amazons of the world or the Microsofts or Apple, you can kind of sense what their culture is all about, even though it's kind of intangible. But culture is an outcome rather than an action. So what does that mean? There's a set of values that you bring to the table, a set of the behaviors and decisions you take in the company on top of the values, and what you actually do versus what you say ultimately leads to what you define as a culture of a company. So for example, if you say I value people, but you invest no money in developing people, then the culture is, you could become very cynical, right? What the company is all about. At Agility, when we were running Agility, we were very much about defining, we were very clear what we wanted to be. We used to say we were an entrepreneurial company. We valued excellence and teamwork and our people, right? And we put programs and systems and compensation matters to support all of that. And I think over time, it wasn't easy, and it's never perfect. We were able to have a very distinct culture, and people over time either fit in or weren't able to fit in. And I think that's the definition of a strong culture, is that once you come in, if you come into a company, you immediately start to feel what are the right behaviors to exhibit, what are the right steps to take, and what is valued in terms of results. And it's all based on the actions you take in the company. And that's, I think, kind of the definition of culture over time. Answer to your question, but I hope you get what I mean.
I do, and I'll tell you also and we're getting another question from Steve, and I guess this is an interesting point as well. If there's a way in which you can kind of pick and choose, right? So when you acquire a new company, if you can keep some of the things but don't keep other things, so I guess that's one point. Yeah. Also quite tricky to do.
No, the way that's good. It's a good. I've always thought about this. I never have a great answer, but the way to think about it is, if you were to cook a meal, right? Think of a stew you're making, and you could go and acquire all the best ingredients and put it in that stew, but you could overcook it or undercook it, right? So you have to have the right kind of mechanisms and recognize over time that all those ingredients that you acquire will contribute to a new kind of an outcome, a meal, and a culture. But if you're true to what you want in terms of how you define results, when you want results, because sometimes you could be short-term oriented or willing to be more patient and longer term oriented. For example, at Agility, when we overcoming the crisis in 2008 and 9, we stated to ourselves, we want to be a company that's built to last, as opposed to meeting targets at all cost. So, and we stated that. And what does that mean? That means that if we're making we would be willing to invest in long-term investments. And that's why I think what would distinguish Agility from others is we were willing to invest in areas and markets that gave us a distinct advantage, whether it was in Australia, the Middle East, Africa, parts of Southeast Asia. We were willing to put and define ourselves as an emerging market, a global network with an emerging market strength. So I think, and that's kind of, we stated that, but we also backed it up with actions and money and time, willingness to wait to get the results. So that kind of defined the culture of the company, as an example of a meal that people could eat.
I like the analogy. We're getting questions also in terms of and you're obviously involved in quite a few startups on the logistics, the supply chain, transportation, let's define it as such. Do you see certain trends? I mean, there's always a lot of hype, there's always buzzwords. I won't say any because I don't want to offend anybody, but do you see some of these technologies? Let's say, obviously, Volta is riding on the sustainability and electric technologies, but are there certain things that will come into play in the next 1 to 3 years or shorter term? And which are those that you think will make the most impact?
Yeah, very good question. Volta Trucks is fantastic and doing, I think, a company with purpose in terms of sustainability and the positioning of the product being kind of in the 16-ton as opposed to the 22-ton or the 3.5-ton, which is our crowded market. So Volta is in a very distinct position, developed in a very rapid pace and doing exceptionally well in many aspects. And I'm quite excited about it. But in addition to, in terms of the landscape, the logistics, there's many. In my work with a company called Cambridge Capital, where I partnered up with them, we've done some work in terms of identifying the landscape of the logistics and where technology is being deployed and all that. And there's one thing to remember: there is no silver bullet, the one thing that will solve everything. But there are different parts of the value chain, or technology that's enabling different parts of the value chain, that are doing some really interesting things, whether it's in the data analytics, visibility, kind of last mile technology in the last mile area, not necessarily the physical side of the last mile, but enabling last mile capabilities. E-commerce fulfillment is quite exciting, as you can imagine. So there's many aspects that we're looking at, that I think of the value chain, that's where technology, new business insights, and approaches that are changing the logistics landscape, the supply chain management landscape. But it's an evolution. It's not a silver bullet. But that evolution, obviously, to the current situation, is accelerated, as you can imagine. And I've seen it in the many companies that we're looking at and have looked at and supporting. Companies have grown in the past year, hundreds of percents because of demand, and they were able to rise up to the challenge. Companies like Agility, as a result of the pandemic, figure out a way to operate under a very difficult environment and control the 18,000 plus people, control and manage and align while they're working from home. And that, I can't imagine how that would have looked like 20 years ago, right? So this tells you that technology has had a tremendous impact, and some of it we take for granted, and some of it is still evolving and will continue to evolve. I guess one more point to consider is, as a company or as an individual, what skill set you have to bring to bear. And this is, in this environment, is the willingness to test out new things, iterate, and continuously improve. Partner and collaborate within the company and outside are all elements of success. And willing to take risks and not be stuck in the status quo. Otherwise, you're going to lose out.
And there's a lot of discussion. There's another trend that is accelerating and has accelerated this year, which is on automation. Work displacement, whether it's, if you're talking about manufacturing, there's more and more robots. If you're talking about warehouses and logistics, there's automation in the warehouses. We're talking also about driverless vehicles. That might be a little bit further down the road. But how do you see that? And how do you see also the type of skills that need to be maybe the upskilling, let's say, of the industry, right? And what new type of knowledge needs to be coming in, and how do we as logistics executives or supply chain executives and professionals upskill ourselves?
So automation is essential. But automation, there's hard automation, machine automation, and then there's software automation, right? Where you avoid manual entry of data into your platforms. So automation is key and an essential part of managing a global, more complex setups. So that's happening. You see it in many aspects of the supply chain, right? Whether in the freight forwarding, how you process transaction, whether in the physical side of how automation, autonomy, autonomous driving. There's many aspects of automation. What I do find is, and I don't know if this is, my gut tells me that's a trend that's going to come. It's not going to change things. It's going to change everything. But it's going to create new opportunities in markets, and therefore, what we have to do as individuals is learn about those trends and see how we can either be part of, and invest in, or build the skills. And some of the skills, I give you a small example at Agility, where we introduced an RPA solution to our invoicing approach, in addition to some other solutions, and that shifted, it took away work from the operator. Instead of them having to do a lot of manual work, it automated it, but it created a tremendous amount of new opportunities around how to develop those algorithms or those bots to support the robotic process automation. So it creates, and it allowed us to handle more volume in the business while being much more smarter about how to handle it.
I'll stay a little bit with the topic, and I guess another thing when it comes to skills is, well, let's call it the education component. So one, we forever keep learning, right? Especially in today's world, and I think it's a healthy mindset to have just in general. But there's not a lot when it comes to. I keep hearing this. So I didn't come from a supply chain education background myself necessarily, but I don't even know if there is such a thing as supply chain education or logistics education or What I wanted to ask you, and also with this crisis, and there's more and more online and resources, and you have VR, virtual reality enabled trainings. You have, I've been in touch with a platform that offers you can literally learn to operate any machine in a factory, in a plant, online, and through augmented reality. And obviously, if you break stuff, it's not going to cost a bomb because you're operating literally on a online simulator.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, if I'm to frame it, is have you seen some new approaches or some new ways, and from your experience, and where do you see also the future? How do we educate, upskill, and in a faster way the people?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I'm not the expert here, but I tell you what, I know what we did. And we had a fantastic guy named Fouad Alam, who used to work at Agility, and a guy by the name of Steve Dichter, who were both champions of the new way of developing people at Agility. And what did it mean? It's a combination of putting together teams, pivotal groups together, giving them problem statement and some ingredients to help them work together and learn together. And I found that to be the best kind of training, because it combines theory with real world problems and kind of an oversight process. And that creates so much energy, positive energy, in any setup, because you're investing in the people, you're in a very clear approach, and they recognize that, and they're finding ways to help in a purposeful way the company improve in a meaningful way, because you're giving them a problem that the company actually does have, and then you're combining that with theoretical knowledge, whether it's different channels, through different speakers, so it's kind of the framework we followed at Agility to develop people. And therefore, there are many tools, whether it's as you call out, Radu, the YouTube, or there are things like, there's many other, in these days, you could register for different topics online from top universities and take a specific course in a specific, and these are all great. But if you combine it in a real world practice and context with real world problems, supervised with other, your team members, that's what I would call a winning formula for growth and development in a meaningful, impactful way that serves the business's priorities. So we had lots of things like that. And I thought it was, and if I reflect back on my personal journey, I went to undergraduate, graduate school, but the biggest learning actually I got was actually from working in the company at Agility. I always say this, in universities, in my MBA, I never pulled an all-nighter. I was always willing to, do my work, end of the day, go to bed and go to the exam the next day, which is, oddly enough, unusual for many people. But at the beginning stages and the explosive growth stages of Agility, there were many all-nighters you had to pull to ensure that you're able to deliver on your promises. And that's part of education, is actually doing things.
It's the fast track, yeah.
It's the fast track, absolutely the fast track.
Yeah. Last question from me, Essa. Looking back, right, in your career, and maybe this advice is more for the younger professionals, but not necessarily. What would be one or two pieces of advice that you found most useful, that helped you the most in terms of, if you were to connect the dots backwards?
Yeah, I would say probably two or three things. Is one, curiosity. Be curious. Be open-minded. Therefore, be open-minded. Ask questions. Never be afraid to seek clarity. And associated with that, internalize. What does that mean for you, and how that information and insight that you gain or knowledge, what does it mean for you? That's, I think, a very important characteristic in any person, especially people young and starting in their careers. And I think that curiosity leads to better awareness and understanding of opportunities. Second is to not be afraid to take the first step. Take actions and start small. Don't think you don't need. If you think you want to conquer the world day one, you may be afraid to take the first step. Start small. Take steps, small steps, and those small steps over time, as you build confidence and you see what's succeeding and what's not succeeding, those steps will become bigger and bigger over time. And I found that's kind of the second important piece of what I find helpful. And especially if you're starting out early, never be afraid to make a mistake. I mean, if you're always afraid, that's another book that I liked, is this mindset. The book called Mindset. It talks about a growth mindset and I forget what the other set of mindset is. The willingness to make mistakes and learn and grow and not be afraid of what people think about your mistakes that you make, versus people who are always afraid to take the step or be judged and all that. And that's kind of a risky proposition. So that's kind of the second advice I would give after curiosity and learning and internalizing that information. Take the first step and iterate as you progress. And then the third, I guess, is be good, whatever that means for you. But be humble, because you're never at the top all the time. There'll be ups and downs along the journey, and you'll always need people around you to support you in that journey. So be humble, be good, be supportive along the way, and always be. And I'm being philosophical here, but always treat people the way you want to be treated, right? And if you do that, if you follow those principles, I think that will lead to success over time.
No, very, very simply but powerfully said, Essa. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks for the great case study. So I also want to encourage everybody to follow Essa, and obviously if you have some great startups and ideas, pitch him, and you can find him on LinkedIn. And thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and good luck, and keep inspiring and keep creating great startups, great ideas, and advising these younger entrepreneurs to make it big.
Thank you, Radu. Thank you for everything you do, actually, in your platform, which inspires me also to learn and grow and become better at what I do.
Super. Thank you, Essa.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.